Hello and welcome to Salon Talks. I'm Andrew O'Hare, executive editor of Salon, and this is a really exciting segment today. We are live with filmmaker Errol Morris, the Academy Award-winning director of Fog of War, The Thin Blue Line, and many other films. And Errol, your new film, which is just premiered at the New York Film Festival, has been at other film festivals, but isn't out in general circulation yet, which is called American Dharma, is based on personal interviews with whom? Let's tell the audience.
Stephen K. Bannon.
Stephen K. Bannon. Steve Bannon, the former campaign manager for Donald J. Trump, or what was CEO of the campaign. It was some bizarre title like that. It wasn't exactly campaign manager.
Yes.
Former head of Breitbart News, executive chairman, I think, was his title there. And after that, strategic advisor in the White House, and now whatever he is, free-roaming, right-wing international hitman or something.
Free-roaming malcontent.
Free-roaming malcontent. So, how much, Steve Bannon, someone very much in the news, how much time did you spend with him to make this film?
On camera, somewhere 16, 17 hours.
17 hours to get down to about 100 minutes of footage, not all of which is him talking, right?
That's correct.
So we wind up with maybe an hour and a half or so of Steve Bannon on camera. As an individual, we can talk about the politics, and we certainly should, but as an individual, how did you find him? What was your personal relationship like with him?
Charming. Intelligent.
Yeah.
Disarming in many, many ways. And repetitive.
He says the same thing over and over again?
Indeed he does.
I have to say that the intelligence and the disarming quality come through very strongly in American Dharma, and I do want to talk about the title also in a minute, Errol, but I was a little distressed by that personally because I sort of wanted to believe that Steve Bannon was this kind of autodidact who'd picked up a few concepts along the way but wasn't really as smart as he cut himself out to be, wasn't really an intellectual, didn't really have the background to be able to talk the kind of line that he talks. And in your film, he does come across as quite an intelligent person. So you're saying that was your impression also?
Yes.
Did you find that distressing in a way too, that someone who is apparently that intelligent could wind up doing the things that he has done and supporting the kind of political movement that he has supported?
Yes. It's clearly a very naive notion that somehow people that at least I consider smart would nevertheless have deeply abhorrent ideas. If you're so smart, how come you believe this or that or the other thing? And I don't have any real answers for that. How do you become a xenophobe? How do you become a racist? How do you become a right-wing ideologue? I'm not sure. It's a career pathway that I have never heard the urge to pursue. But of course it's of interest. How did Steve Bannon become Steve Bannon?
Right.
What drove him to this? And then the question that appears again and again and again, for me, and I imagine for a lot of other people as well, people want the pie graph. It's a question I've been asked many, many times. Does he really believe this stuff? Is he a true ideologue? Or is he some kind of snake oil salesman?
Is he a huckster just trying to get political power? That would be the other.
That would be correct, yes. Is this a form of opportunism? And I would have to say it's a mixture of both A and B. And it's changing from time to time. Probably even in the context of a single interview, it's changing. But I'm left with a strange, crazy person. I don't know how better to describe it. I've interviewed a lot of crazy people in
Yes,
my
you have.
day. And what I'm left with at the end is a feeling of destructiveness. I would say almost diabolical destructiveness. A desire to bring things down, not to build anything up. And that's really, really frightening.
He lays out this theory for you a couple of times that he's trying to shock the system, essentially the American political system or maybe the global political system, into reforming and reinventing itself.
He's the guy who comes in with the paddles and says, "Clear!"
Right, in order to fend off.
And then zaps the body politics back into some form of existence.
Yeah, in order to fend off what
Or that would be the claim.
That would be the claim. In order to fend off what he calls revolution, right? He says that a couple of times.
Yes.
So what does he, but he doesn't really answer your question of what he wants the future society to look like, does he? Did you get any sense of that from him? Like, is there an end game? Is there a strategy? What does the Steve Bannon future look like?
As far as I can tell, there is no end game. Destruction is the goal, and there's no end beyond that. I'm interested all over again as a result of making American Dharma in interviews. What does it mean to interview somebody? I guess we're doing that.
I guess we're doing that right now. Yeah. It's meta context.
I have been told, well, maybe you didn't ask tough enough questions.
I'm sure people may have that reaction. It sounds like people already have had that reaction.
Yes, you are correct. And what's interesting, when I first set out to make this film, this was in January of this year, Fire and Fury, Michael Wolff's
the Michael Wolff book about the White House.
had just come out and become this gigantic bestseller, and Bannon was at the heart of it. Even if it's not made explicit, you can tell that a lot of the information from the book comes from his conversations with Bannon.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I think that's clear.
And I wanted to talk to him as a result. I thought, this is interesting. This is a key player in Trump's election and in the early period of his presidency. But I learned something over the successive months, because from January to the present time, Bannon was interviewed and interviewed and interviewed and interviewed.
Right.
From no interviews, suddenly there was a plethora of interviews. Everybody that you could think of. Charlie Rose, before he left CBS. The Economist, CNN, The Guardian, on and on and on and on and on.
He's reclaimed his role as the spokesman for this supposed international movement, right? Which it seemed like he had lost after being kicked out of the White House.
Certainly, he likes to see himself as the spokesperson.
Yeah.
For whatever you want to call it, the alt-right national populism, you tell me what to call it. And yes, he's now exported his brand of politics worldwide. If it was confined to America at a certain period of time, now he's all over Europe, promoting neo-fascist movements of one kind or another. He's in Hungary, he's in Italy, he's in France, he's in Holland, he's in Britain, and on and on and on and on.
Did you find it, I do want to return to that question of how people will understand your relationship with him, because I feel like your movies are always constructed from your personal interactions with these people. You're a voice and a presence in this movie, as in most of them. And
maybe more so even.
In this particular one? Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true in this case. And people may have the reaction, well, you don't directly confront him on the question of whether he's a white supremacist. It comes up and he denies it, but you don't dwell on it. You do actually directly confront him on the differences between what he says he wants, the sort of economic populism, a term that he would approve of, versus the complete deregulatory, standard issue Republican politics that has been most of the Trump economic agenda, which seems utterly divergent, almost poles apart from what he says he wants. And he kind of doesn't have an answer for that one at all, does he? To talk about the actual economic policies of this administration versus what he says he wants?
No. He doesn't have an answer for a lot of things. One central question, it is addressed in the film. How do you call yourself an economic populist and promote the tax bill,
right,
which is essentially giving money to the rich? How do you do that? How do you justify that?
He doesn't even try to answer that question.
There's an important thing to understand, and this is something to understand about interviews. I'd forgotten the line. I mentioned it just yesterday in a Q&A. Einstein's comment about idiocy. An idiot is someone who does things in the same way and expects different results.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, I was going to use the line of the former New Yorker writer Janet Malcolm, who described an interview as a subtle exercise in influence and counter-influence between the interviewer and the subject. And one of the things that is fascinating about this movie is how much Steve Bannon wants you to like him and wants you to respect him. He announces himself as a fan of your film, The Fog of War.
He does indeed.
The film Robert McNamara, which he...
Showing once again that you can't always choose your fans.
And apparently truthfully saying that he saw that very early in its career at the Telluride Film Festival, I think, right?
Yes.
And you talk a little bit about the strategy in this film, which is so fascinating, of using other films that came up, I guess, in your conversation with Steve Bannon as a way to frame your conversation with him.
Well, I had asked him even before our first formal interview, because I actually went down to the Breitbart mansion in Washington to meet him for the first time. But in our first filmed interview, we were prepared to show various films that he picked.
Right.
I asked him to pick films that he had been influenced by, films that he loved. Beyond that, actually, not just films that were influential and films that he loved, scenes in films that influenced him and that he loved. And some of the choices are surprising. It's taught me one thing, that film is like a Rorschach test. You put a piece of film in front of somebody and you ask them, hey, what's it about?
Right.
And you could get a whole number of diverse answers.
Yes. Including your films, apparently.
Including my films. I did something a little bit like this. It's been on my mind for years. I was asked by the Academy Awards to create a short film that would run at the beginning of the Oscars. Mm-hmm. This is now probably about 15 years ago. it was sound bites. You know, people would mention what movie they loved, and there would be a short comment on why they loved it. So in the green room in New York at one time, I had Iggy Pop, I had Mikhail Gorbachev, Donald Trump.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my God.
You can see this on YouTube.
Wow.
The piece that ran on the Oscars was Trump saying how much he loved King Kong.
Whoa.
He came and conquered New York. I could identify with that.
I think I understand everything now.
And then I asked him about Citizen Kane.
Uh-huh.
Because he told me how much he loved Citizen Kane. And so we had a short conversation. You can see it on YouTube.
Wow. Oh my God, I'm so interested in this now.
One of my favorite things. And at the end of the interview, I said, do you have any advice for Charles Foster Kane? Given the opportunity to
What a great question.
talk to him, what would you say to him? And Trump thought for a moment and said, I'd tell him, get yourself a different woman.
Words to live by, apparently.
Get yourself a different woman. Yeah, and I've thought a lot about it over the years. Because, and does this come as a surprise? For Donald Trump, what are movies about?
Uh-huh.
They're about Donald J. Trump.
Yeah, well, everything is about Donald J. Trump.
That's
so,
correct.
Right. So why wouldn't a movie
It's
be
a
about him as
kind
well?
of
Yeah.
solipsistic universe. You know, I have my my solipsist creed. You know, one's company, two's a crowd.
Yeah.
Which applies
Yeah.
in this case.
It seems as if Steve Bannon wants to perceive himself as the hero of a classic kind of, you know, masculine war picture or Western. You have 12 O'Clock High, the classic war film. One of the things that is a repeated theme through this movie. A couple of John Ford pictures, My Darling Clementine and The Searchers, where he sees himself as this sort of John Wayne Gregory Peck sort of figure, but he isn't comfortable coming right out in saying that. Is the Steve Bannon story to you about him trying to make himself into the hero of a motion picture where he saves the town? Is that the deal?
There has to be some element of that. You want me to embrace something that I would consider possibly overly simplistic.
Possibly.
But is there an element of that?
Yeah.
You betcha, of course there is.
Yeah.
You don't select those movies for no reason at all. You don't pick these scenes. And I'm amazed, while we were editing, Searchers is one of my favorite movies.
Great film.
It's a film that you can say is a great film without any fear whatsoever of
Yeah.
someone saying, oh, no, that's not a great film, because it is a great film.
Yeah.
And it's a great film because it's an endlessly complex film. What is
Yes.
it about? It seems to be about everything. It's about the West. It's about race. It's about family, and
Yep.
on and on and on.
About gender relations, for sure. All those things. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
What scene does he pick? You could pick. I should even ask you, Andrew.
Putting me on the spot here. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Oh, come on.
No, what scene would I pick from The Searchers? I can't. I'm not going to answer that spur of the moment. I don't know. I haven't seen the film in probably 10 years.
Obviously, the questions I'm asking you are not difficult enough.
Yeah, that's right.
Andrew,
That's right.
what is your favorite scene in The Searchers?
Talk about the scene. What's
You've been asked a question.
I deny being a white supremacist, Errol. What?
But here's the scene he picked.
Yeah.
It's utterly amazing. he picks the scene where John Wayne says she's not white.
I know.
She's Comanche.
Yeah. One of the most troubling scenes in that film.
One of the most troubling scenes, not to repeat, but to repeat what you just
Yeah.
said in that film, and one of the most racially charged scenes
Oh, yes.
in a racially charged film.
Possibly one of the most racially charged scenes in American cinema history, if I can be grandiose. I think that's probably fair. But yeah, and for this guy
And yet it's not your favorite scene in the circus.
It's a pretty powerful scene. It's a very troubling scene, as you just suggested. And for the guy who is associated with an international movement that, correctly or not, he would say incorrectly, is identified with racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim sentiment, anti-everything, anti-outsiderness, he would say that that's unfair, but to identify that scene where the question of somebody's racial identity becomes hotly disputed in this bizarre way, it's revealing, right?
And yes, he identifies with John Wayne, but he identifies with John Wayne in that scene.
Yeah.
And there's a close-up, it's just an extraordinary close-up of John Wayne's face, partially shrouded, looking grim. You're overcome by a feeling of darkness.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's certainly what I get. That's what I got from Steve Bannon anyway. But what is interesting in your film is somebody who does seem so intelligent, so articulate, more intelligent than I was expecting, as I confessed, and this overwhelming feeling of darkness and heaviness about him. His physicality, the unshaven face, the mop of hair, the way that he dresses, the way that he carries himself, the way that he talks about the world, all of it is extremely dark.
Yes. Frightening and dark.
Yeah. How did he react when you told him that you were afraid of him, essentially? Because what you have in the film is him sitting there silent. Did he say anything?
You saw the film.
Okay.
There's something also that interests me, a whole set of questions. I'm going to write something about it.
You should.
Why not? Is if someone sits there silently and doesn't answer a question, that's not a failure. You know, self-serving of me to say so, but that's a success. You've created this moment. I think there are a whole number of them in American Dharma. Mm-hmm. This powerful moment where he just sits and glowers at me. You can see him twitching slightly.
You make him uncomfortable at a number of moments, and I didn't think that he was somebody who could be made uncomfortable, but apparently that's not true. I hate to say this, I almost hate myself for saying this, but there is a certain sensitivity about the man. Is that fair?
Sensitivity.
I know that sounds like a positive attribute. I'm sorry.
Well, there are positive attributes. People would love evil as such to be just one color. Let me guess. Black. Without shades of gray, without nuance, without exception, without relief. Evil is complex and complicated. And I would submit that confronted with evil, the important thing for us is not to turn our back on it and pretend it really isn't there, but to look at it square in the face and to try to figure out a way to deal with it. This may be one of the most dangerous men in the world. Make no mistake. It's interesting.
I believe that.
I have an editor in common at Penguin with Joshua Green, mm-hmm. who writes for Bloomberg and wrote a book about Bannon, a very good book about
it. It is a good book.
Bannon, the Devil's Bargain. And Joshua Green saw this movie in various stages. We talked about it. He has been very complimentary about the movie. But he felt the movies were a way in, a different way in, to see an aspect of Bannon's personality that would remain unseen otherwise. He also said something very interesting to me about, this is a new word that I've just learned in the last few weeks, deplatforming.
Yes.
Deplatforming.
Yes.
Thank you for not deplatforming me. Let's see, I can use it in a sentence.
Yeah.
Thank you for not deplatforming me today. Here I am.
I would never deplatform you.
I am yet
We would never
to
do
be deplatformed.
Good.
It could happen anytime.
Yes, it's likely to happen at some point.
What are you saying?
It's likely to happen to all of us. It's like death and taxes.
Oh, now it's the generic.
Yes, yes.
I will be deplatformed because all of us,
all of humanity will
all
face
of
that
humanity
fate
will
at some point.
face being
Before we wrap,
deplatformed.
before we wrap, let me ask you about the title, American Dharma, which has many.
Let me just finish the
Yo,
thought.
please do.
Josh Green said that that's what Hillary tried to do to Trump. She tried to deplatform him.
It didn't work.
What makes you say that? Yeah, it didn't work.
Yeah.
And it's not gonna work.
Right.
You know, I don't want to get into First Amendment this and First Amendment that, because yes, it's a First Amendment issue, but it goes beyond that. It goes to an issue of politics. What do you do when you're confronted by something like this? Do you take the ostrich option, the
Right.
hole in the sand? If you can't see evil, then
it doesn't exist somehow? Yeah.
what me worry? Or you go after it.
Well, I would say that David Remnick's failure with the New Yorker Festival, where he booked Steve Bannon and then was forced to deplatform him, was a public relations failure. I don't know. I would be eager to interview Steve Bannon. I think putting him as the headliner of a festival was the public relations equivalent of walking into the helicopter blade. And so I kind of see both sides of the issue on that front. But yes, we can't, I agree with you 100%. We cannot look away from somebody like this. We cannot ignore his ideas. We cannot not listen to what he says just because we want to clutch our pearls and deny that he matters or has influence. He clearly matters and has influence.
And I don't even have pearls.
To clutch, well, we can do something about that.
Clutch or otherwise. I think this has to be dealt with. One of the most chilling things in American Dharma is Stephen Bannon telling us the story. It's like the bedtime story from hell of how he got Donald Trump elected.
Yeah.
And if I could pick, I suppose like Steve Bannon, if I am asked to select those sections of American Dharma that I think are most powerful, some of it is found footage, some of it is my interview material with Bannon himself. But the scene where they sit like predators, there's Giuliani,
Yeah.
there's Bannon, waiting for the Clinton accusers
Yes.
to appear prior to the second debate. It's a nightmare. The whole thing is a nightmare.
Yes.
You want to click your heels or blink 3 times or do something to make it end, but it doesn't end.
Yeah.
It goes on and on and on. And when Bannon tells us in the movie, I love it when people say, I've learned nothing. Well, you've learned nothing from the movie because you probably didn't want to learn anything. when Bannon gives us his recitation about the honey badger, his love,
Yeah.
his undying love for the honey badger and the honey badger video on YouTube, seen by...
Okay, he doesn't seem like an intellectual at that moment, but...
No, he seems like a connoisseur of honey badger videos. I think it's an intellectual pursuit. How dare you? Come on now. What does he tell you about the honey badger? He says the honey badger don't care.
Yeah.
The honey badger got to do what the honey badger got to do. The honey badger don't give a shit.
It's a celebration of persistent stupidity or stupid persistence.
Beyond that, what does the honey badger do? The honey badger kills
Right.
and eats. It's a kind of soulless, faceless, destructive biological machine.
That's terrifying.
Oh, really? Oh, you're just saying that to be nice to me. Yeah. Yeah, it's terrifying. You should be terrified.
Well, we should wrap, Errol, but I want to tell you what my moment in this movie was. No, please.
Deplatform me.
I'm not going to deplatform you. We're simply going to conclude our delightful live conversation with Errol Morris, the director of the new film American Dharma. I didn't actually get to ask you about that word, which is a Sanskrit word used in Buddhism that Steve Bannon mentions several times, which is why you picked it. And I'm going to go ahead and say that I suspect that as a title, it has a double meaning, or maybe more than two meanings. If you go ahead and look up the word Dharma.
You would be correct, sir.
Go ahead and look up what the word Dharma means in Buddhism. I was going to say that the moment where you start talking about Lucifer or Satan in Paradise Lost, and Bannon is all over that. Not merely does he understand the reference, he immediately leaps on it and says that he identifies really strongly with that character, and he quotes almost accurately one of the most famous lines from the poem, indicating that if he hasn't read the whole thing, he's at least read some of it. And that, to me, was actually terrifying, that somebody who was well-educated enough and intellectual enough and intelligent enough to have read Milton wound up there. That was a dark moment for me.
Well, I'm sorry. Bannon loves Milton. I have to confess. Look, do I want to say I'm grateful to Steve Bannon for anything? Maybe not, but let me try this. Steve Bannon got me to read Milton again. And for that, I am deeply grateful.
There's a public service announcement that I never thought I would hear anyone deliver. Errol Morris, director of many amazing documentaries. His new film is American Dharma, based on interviews with Steve Bannon. Will be out later in the year?
Yeah.
Okay. Errol, thank you so much.
Sir.
A pleasure.